Welcome back, everyone. Hope the watch parties are going well and that some food may have arrived yet. I'm not sure if it was there when you got there, and I hope you're enjoying listening to the panellists. So this session that we're going into now is diversity and acceptance. Last round, those of you who watched would have noticed that I wasn't accurate on all the details. So this time I'm going to invite our panellists to introduce themselves. So starting over here with Sinead. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. My name's Sinead and I work for the Domestic Violence Action Centre. I do a lot of work particularly around primary prevention and healthy relationships, and I work a lot in the high schools in Ipswich and greater regions. Thank you for having me.
Well, hi everyone, my name's Eleanor. I'm here from Headspace Ipswich. I'm one of the senior intake clinicians at the service. I'm one of the co-facilitators of our diversity group. And also a member of the queer community myself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Fechner, and I'm a councillor for Division 3 at Ipswich City Council.
Hi, everyone. My name's Casey. I am part of the Ipswich Youth Advisory Council. I'm also a Kamilaroi Aboriginal woman, part of the queer community, and I live with a chronic pain condition, so diversity is a very, very important issue for me.
Hi, my name's Sarah Lalagavesi. I work for Multicultural Australia. I'm a youth engagement worker, and we're currently servicing the Ipswich area in their youth hubs, so it's a pleasure to be here today.
Hello, my name's Ruth Allback. I am the Head of Special Education for Rosewood State High School and Rosewood State School.
Hello, my name is Jaden. I am from Rosewood and I'm a student at Rosewood High. Thank you.
Great. What a great bunch of panellists. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to host this by asking some questions, obviously, and the invitation is if you would like to contribute, just hold your mic up and please jump in. Really keen to hear the voices of our young panellists today too. That's what we're here for, so keen to hear your perspectives. So when we read through the questions and comments that were submitted by young people for this panel conversation, I was really struck by how many highlighted the simple importance of just being accepted and included. Like, it's just such a basic human need is what it really highlighted to me at a very kind of fundamental level. This came up in our last panel around mental health, about feeling judged. It was such a big impact. So all of these panels obviously interrelate with each other. Just going to introduce Chloe, she's in our hot seat. She's going to read one of the questions, which I think really summarises this issue for young people.
Teenagers like myself find it incredibly difficult to find a job due to my piercings and dreadlocks. We as a city want to create a more accepting, diverse place, however show the opposite in everyday life. Kids cannot control their upbringing, and many people judge them automatically. We cannot control our financial circumstance. Therefore, it is hard for us to be provided with opportunities. Thousands of kids miss out every year due to their financial situation, not their talent.
So, and that really did sum up a lot of what was expressed in the various questions. So thanks for reading that, Chloe. So this is an open question to our panellists. What is needed now to create a more inclusive and welcoming Ipswich? Sinead, I'm wondering if you've got any... Can I throw you on the spot?
Sure. I think that's a very large question. There is so much we can be doing as a community. I think, with my background as a senior high school teacher, I think, examples that I was able to do, and I think that's a really important thing, I think, for whether it's schools or community groups, sporting. I've been married to my wife for 18 years, and we have 2 children, and, you can say that in the context, even in 2020, and people will still give you looks of is this okay, And so as somebody who has experienced forms of discrimination, I can empathise with that, but I think in a school context when teachers are just comfortable and to be open, I never hid and I would not apologise for being who I am, and I think that's a really big step forward, and particularly for young people, that's really refreshing and it creates a safe space for them. So I think in terms of like just encouraging workplaces to do the same. You know, it's simple gestures, whether it's having the LGBTIQ A plus, you know, flags and refugee flags, and whether it's something in a window, quotes around the place, whatever it needs to be. I think it's so important to show that we respect everyone, regardless of our, you know, our race, our religions, our sexual orientation, or whatever it might be, our gender. You know, I think that we will have a safer world when we actually start respecting one another for being different. And it starts with what we do personally and the people around us. And if we all actually take that same advice and take that on board, I think that would be really a great step in the right direction.
So inclusion starts with us and how
Absolutely.
we show up. And
Yeah.
I like your kind of, there's some very simple things that we can do to create inclusive spaces that make people feel welcome.
Yeah.
Certainly came up in the mental health panel about you get to the front door and you're treated poorly, you won't come back, and it's taken so much courage to get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm enjoying the thread of the flow of the conversations. Andrew, have you got any perspectives on that question around inclusion in Ipswich?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what was a wonderful collation of beautiful ideas about the small things that we can be doing in our everyday life. Some of my favourite places to go have those little hidden treasures around the place. It's not so on the nose, and it doesn't have to be. And marginalised communities aren't asking to have everyone drop everything and acknowledge them when they walk in, but to know that something, to know that you're walking into a workplace or your favourite cafe or a restaurant, and know that it's safe and you can be there and be present in who you are in that moment. That's really important. In the context of what I do, I think having more young leaders in the city, and a few of my panellists might find it hilarious that I consider myself young at 27, but I think more young, proactive people, you know, blazing a trail for celebrating differences is something super important. And I commend Cameron on the work that he does with the Ipswich Youth Advisory Council, and how brave all of the members are, and not in a and not saying that as a tokenistic brave, but truly, you know, coming in, and lots of them have different backgrounds and wonderful ideas. You know, they're the future leaders of our city. And I did mention before we started out the mental health panel earlier that Ipswich, it seems like intergenerational equity has never been considered before, but now is the time for us to start paving the way, and a big part of moving forward and having opportunities for young people is leading the way and making sure that the environments that we work and play in are safe and inclusive.
Great, thank you very much. So just going to move to Jay now. Welcome, Jay. I'm keen for your perspective as a young student at school. Many people have expressed feeling judged and that diversity isn't welcomed in the community. What's been your experience with inclusion in Ipswich? Where have you found it easy to be connected in and included?
Well, when I play soccer at the Ipswich club, I feel like many of the other players and their parents are judging me. Like, they don't know what being deaf means, and I feel that I'm not the same. And it's not physically or sport-wise, it's just that I'm not the same as them. But my parents have heard about that, and they've advocated with the club, and they've tried to tell the club that I'm not happy, and the club themselves weren't happy about that behaviour. So I gave my sports shirt back. I said that I didn't want to play there. simply because it didn't have good inclusion. It felt like that everyone being there didn't understand what it was like to need to be involved. And then I went to another club at Rosewood, and they accepted me. They respected me. They didn't talk about me and why I needed certain things. We just played on the ground, and then we were in the grand final and we won. We were all, as a team, very happy. So another thing about not being included was Ipswich High School. I was being bullied because I'm a deaf person. I was hit 2 times in my head, and the last one put me in an ambulance. And another thing that happened is when a person picked me up and physically dumped me onto the ground, unprovoked, with no reason whatsoever. So then I did homeschooling for a while. I stayed home with my mum for 6 months. And it was hard to focus. It was hard to get the work done because it was difficult trying to catch up with everything. And my parents were trying to sell their house at the time to find a better school, to move to an area in a catchment with a better school, which was hard for them. And when I did finally move to Marburg and go to Rosewood High School, they all accepted me. No one bullied me. They were all very nice to me. They all just treated me like a smart person. And when the deaf community events happen, they involve me because there's no interpreters there. And it's difficult to understand, what's happening, what's going on in certain events. So I've always been a part of the community, but I want to show people that I'm improving. I am deaf, and I have vision. I'm deaf and blind. So I want to show people that that doesn't mean stupid. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean I'm not smart enough. It just shows that we're all the same, we're all equal, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And it's okay to feel different. It's okay to show that we're all human and we have human rights. My family has always taught me to try my best, do my best, become a good person, show respect to other people. And I have a lot of support. I have people around me who support me a lot. And I've been to TAFE. I've studied at TAFE. But TAFE also wasn't very inclusive. So when they asked me about my brain injury, they asked if I had an intellectual disability. But I don't have intellectual disability. So they gave me an inferior interpreter who thought I had a brain injury. And my mother and my grandmother fought and advocated very hard to get a better interpreter for me. And when my mother told them, if you give him a better interpreter, he will do this course like everyone else will. And my mother was absolutely right.
So, Jay, I'm hearing just such a powerful story about inclusion. I'm going to pull out a few threads from it if it's okay. So one is that I'm seeing is around deafness, and that if the places that you went had accessible interpreters, you'd have more access to your community. Maybe some deafness awareness training for different centres and places would make them more accessible for you. And I think really importantly what you've highlighted is inclusion is really important for everyone because we're all the same, but when you're not included, it's not just being on the out, it's actually dangerous. So I really am grateful for your story, because what you've shared is that when you're judged and you're on the outer from people, you're at risk of harm. And I think that's a really powerful story about inclusion. And it's not just about, nice, diverse communities. It's actually got a very serious element to it. So I'm really grateful that you brought that story. And I'm wondering for you, and I'll come to the other panellists in a minute, I just wanted to ask you another question while I've got you. Those spaces and places that were so welcoming and created a community and you were able to be a part of, what was it about that made that happen for you, do you think? Did they have deafness awareness training, or was it just nice people?
Well, in the deaf community, we've been struggling to try and find better and good things and things to be good at. But in the hearing world, people don't understand what it's like to be deaf and what it's like to be a deaf person or anybody else with a disability. It's very difficult to understand externally. It's like if they don't know how to communicate, there's always going to be dropouts in communication.
So I'm just going to go to Ruth. She's got her microphone up. You had a comment to make?
So I can probably add to that. So Jayden came to me 3 years ago, and my school, Rosewood State High School, had absolutely no deaf awareness. So it was a struggle, and I guess this isn't just for deafness but for all diversity. The best power that you have to support these people is education. So we didn't know, and we called in experts. We asked them the questions that we didn't know. My whole staff decided, well, if Jayden has to communicate with us, so we went and did PD in how to sign. So most of my staff can sign the alphabet, they can say good morning to Jayden, so they can understand basic signs. So to me, the power of inclusion is about being educated. It's not about surmising what's best for the child or the person. It's about asking them. And that's what I did with Jayden. I said, what do you need? And we filled those gaps.
Wonderful. So a frame around people know what's best for themselves. What if we ask people? Wow, what a revelation. So thank you for that insight. So I'm going to stay on this kind of serious note around violence and vulnerability when you're on the outer, because I think we can go, let's have a cultural festival, and it's all great and all part of the story, but there is real harm that can happen for people that are on the edges. So I'm opening it up. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but just any reflections or thoughts around the vulnerability that can come when you're not part of the mainstream. Thanks, Eleanor.
I was going to say Thank you to Jaden for sharing his experience, and I think that kind of speaks to it in itself, the idea that creating spaces where people can share their lived experience is so important. I think because as has kind of been spoken about, it's about not assuming and about focusing on, what these people are actually experiencing. I think that's across the board when we talk about diversity, is recognising those differences and creating spaces that are safe and inclusive. And I think when people don't have those spaces, I guess as a worker at Headspace, we work with a lot of young people who are part of the LGBTIQA plus community, for example, and most definitely can say that, we do work with young people experiencing the impacts of not being accepted, being judged for being different, and just not having spaces where they have that strong sense of belonging and that their identity is respected and okay, and to kind of see that kind of acknowledged, and then to create spaces where that is actually really valued and things put in place to promote it is really lovely. And I think, for example, as a facilitator of diversity, it's always a real honour to, I guess, have young people come in, often for the first time, into a space where they feel like they can actually say, this is who I am, and to know that it is safe, as, for example, the group rules are set by the young people around that. And we, so I guess I'm just using that as an example of, I guess the difference it can make when we find spaces where we are accepted for who we are and not judged, and knowing that without that sense of belonging, there are really significant impacts of it, for mental health, for, just outcomes across the board, really,
Thank you for sharing. Casey, if I can move on to you, I'm just wondering, what do you see as the big issues in relation to creating and welcoming an inclusive Ipswich, other than what we've already talked about?
I really think some of the big issues come from managing gatekeepers. And when I use that term, I mean the big players in a game. Because at the end of the day, their top-down is where you get big culture change. And if we want to see that in the city, that is... I'm not going to sit here and point out who those gatekeepers are, because one, it's very complex, that structure. But going off Ruth's comment, it's education. It's not always necessarily people are doing uninclusive things on purpose. Obviously, there are times when, yes, that is the case, but education definitely is key in reforming that. I think another really, really important thing is, I always say young people aren't the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today, so they need to be central in these conversations, because that's where a lot of these progressive culture change ideas come from, and that's how you're going to have these shifts that bring about these more and more inclusive activities. So if that's really the underlying basis of anything that we as a city have, if that's the baseline moving forward, it's going to be continual improvement.
So inclusions requires a bit of dismantling of the status quo. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's a long story, isn't it? Yeah. What are the little things that we can do to, I guess, start to break down those power structures that might impact on people's ability to be included?
I think one really, really easy, simple thing that everybody can do is build that community yourself every single day. And it's not easy, and it's not always the time and place. But if you can just every day make sure either, you're trying to better yourself to become more inclusive every day, or you're helping a friend, a family member, a colleague become that little bit more inclusive every day, every week, that is the overtime activity that can happen. And they can be tiny little small shifts. They can be sharing, hey, I found this really interesting article that's just some food for thought. It's not going in and going, you need to absolutely change your opinion on this. It's just, this is something to think on.
So something else I heard from Jaden's story was the power of advocacy. So that having unpaid people by your side. So services do an amazing job, and people still need unpaid relationships, I guess, to support. I'm curious about the role that advocacy might play in I'll look at the service providers, like in your work. What kind of advocacy do you need to do to support people to get the access and inclusion? Have you had any experiences with those I'm sure every day is an exercise in advocacy, but Ruth,
So you're right, and again I'll come back to education. So a lot of people don't actually read the policies that are govern their actual workplace. They actually glib over their mandatory training, and they actually really don't take it to heart about what our policies are actually stating about inclusion, because it's your everyday language and you know that needs to change, because as you said, sometimes people are non-inclusive and they don't actually realise it. And I agree with you, that's where the advocacy comes in. You don't have to be dictatorish about it, mean about it. You just need to go, hey, that's not okay. Do you know that when you do that, this is how it affects me? And so that's the power that you have on a daily basis to say, stop, that's not okay. And that's where we need people to be able to know what's not okay. Because, you know, jokes, comments, you know, and I'll use blonde jokes. You know, yeah, they're funny, but they actually can be quite hurtful. And some people do take offence to that. So if you take offence to that, you need to be game to say, hey guys, that's not okay.
So there's something about self-advocacy in that as well. And I guess if you're really vulnerable, that could be a challenge. I wonder, Sarah, if you had any experiences in those spaces with young people around self-advocacy and...
So in terms of advocacy, another area we kind of looked at also was based on, as Ruth said before, education, training. So cultural awareness for our organisation is one thing that we really, really try to push for. Teaching or someone learning someone else's culture is such an important aspect in today's society. So advocacy as far as that training, that training component of it, and supporting other service providers and ensuring that they are well equipped and trained so that they can provide that and, look after or help the young person and support them.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of responsibility to self-advocate when you're already on, feeling vulnerable, and if you've been hurt by systems and the power structures that you talked about, Casey, it's a lot, isn't it? And it's, there's a lot in that. So I'll just throw out for an open question, what are the most challenging aspects about working in a diverse city with diverse people? Do you guys see? Eleanor?
I think sometimes it can feel quite daunting for people, essentially, that there is so much to know and that we always have so much to learn. But I think a stance of curiosity and openness in that learning can go so far, essentially, that when you don't know something, to just ask and that to be okay, I think that is really massive. And to, if you're on the end of actually, being someone who is sharing some information about their own experience or advocating for something, that idea of trying to bring people alongside you kind of thing, rather than, it being kind of a confrontational thing. I think it can be really hard, especially when you've had negative experiences of being, a victim of bullying, things like that, to stay, able to respond in that way. And that's when it's so important to have spaces where you can actually talk through those things and get support. Because advocacy to me is something that starts at the individual, and we can sometimes feel a bit hopeless about the size of these structures and the scale of change required. But if we all take it as a responsibility every day and see activism as an everyday thing, it's the small things count. Yeah.
So some self-work we can do is show up in curiosity, because you can't be in judgment when you're being curious. I like that. Thank you.
I'm just going to add to that too. I think I sort of jotted down a little note here because I was like, I like this. So one of the challenging, I think, aspects in terms of a whole community is making sure that everyone's voices are heard, because we are really diverse. And I think that that's really important, is that everyone is respected and heard in all aspects of our community and life. So I think that's
how
a
do we
challenge.
do that? How do we hear
Yeah.
like, you know, we've got these panels, and
Yeah.
this is the outcome of a policy. So picking
Yep.
up Ruth's point, great policy. There is lots of great policy out there, but there's some translation problems that go on. So how do we do that? What is it that we need to do? And I like, you know, Eleanor, your frame is like itself, like be curious yourself. But what else? What can we do to inspire that? Casey?
I think one thing when we're talking about everybody being able to voice their opinions, I think that's really important to note. That is including people whose opinions might be on that slightly more inflammatory end of things. And when we say safe spaces, we do often mean in terms of, you know, the more marginalised groups. But sometimes they need, the other side needs the safe space to feel like they can actually ask those questions that they know are going to generally get kind of an emotional response, because they might actually be trying to kind of overcome all those opinions that they've had over a lifetime. But if they know they're just going to be met with all sorts of different emotions, which are completely valid emotions and experiences, it's about creating safe spaces for everyone in the story to be able to go, okay, well, I personally can't answer that question because that's going to be a very emotional situation, you know, but well, I am trying to ask the question. So I think that's one way to kind of establish a way to kind of answer those complex opinions.
So policy work is individual work. It's like, how are we showing up ourselves in curiosity, wanting to have the conversations? It's like it starts. Is that where it starts? Andrew?
You would love to be optimistic and think that there's always a level playing field. And I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned on the panel this afternoon that I think is extremely important, particularly for young people, and that's the impacts of social media. You know, where you aren't on a level playing field, and how online bullying has really changed the face of what school looks like for a lot of people. I've been out of school for 10 years this year, and I would dread going back to school knowing the tortures and the horrors that some people have to go through today. Bullying wasn't as relentless and all-encompassing 10 years ago. You could kind of switch off when you went home, but that's not possible now. So creating safe spaces is so important. Creating level playing fields where you actually have to look someone in the eye and tell them how you feel about them or express your thoughts and feelings is extremely important. But there are a lot of gutless people out there who prey on the weak, who prey on the marginalised, who often we spend too much time thinking about, because that's human nature. When you're upset, you dwell and you fall into some pretty negative spaces, and you can. So I guess I have a question for the young people on this panel, and it's, how do you deal with the impacts of social media, you know, in 2020, and what does that mean for you, and how do you switch off, and how do you know who to listen to, or seek help when something's happening to you online, and it can disappear in an instant, but the impact that it might have on you is quite detrimental and long-lasting.
Well, I'll start off and then I'll pass over to Jaden. Councillor Fechner, I'm not that much younger than you, so I was able to kind of leave school as well, and leave the bullying at school. But in terms of what still having, a lot of online presence, I think a lot of it is a big issue that's only growing, and I think there's a lot that can be said for educating young people to feel empowered to notify a safe adult when something is going wrong online, and what can actually be done in the moment that something's happening, blocking, reporting, deleting, all that sort of stuff, because that definitely did not happen in my day. You kind of just left it there and it got worse, but I think there's more of that conversation happening, so I think just building on that is really, really important. But I'll pass over to Jaden, who might have a bit more of a real-time experience.
So I do have social media. I use it a lot. Sometimes when people try to bully me, I just try to block them. They will often find a way to come back, and they try and make me feel depressed or suicidal, things like that. And there should be a no bullying policy because it makes people feel unsafe.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of our summary questions. I might get Chloe to read it to us now. Question 6 kind of highlights this case.
Since COVID, and in an age where there is a large social media influence, it is easy for hate and insensitive views to spread. How are you seeing these views be addressed and discouraged in the community?
So I'll open up. Ruth.
Well, I know at a high school level, our school has gone mobile phone free between the school hours because we were spending so many hours of the day sorting through what has happened post 3 o'clock that we actually are losing valuable time to core learning. And we have noticed that that has dropped significantly because that has got them off that time at school. It has also shown those students that are absolutely addicted to technology. So that's the other thing we encourage students to do is, and we talk to parents at the beginning of the year about monitoring what's on their social media, the types of apps that they should and shouldn't have because some are so dangerous with, online predators, etc. And we try to, say to families, no technology in the bedroom. Get the technology out, have a technology time off. And so we give parents and families options around how to support the young children, because once they become addicted to their phone, saying, no, get off it, you really have some really significant behaviour issues that really start to break down the family relationships. So we've really addressed it and on a head-on thing at our school, saying we will not tolerate it. And when I have been bought online comments and whatever, I actually hold restorative chats. I say, right, we're going to have this conversation between the two of you. I sit down and do a proper restorative chat with them because I say, if you can't say this to the person here now in front of you, then you shouldn't be saying it online. So again, it comes back to education, it comes back to processes, but it is also for young people, help by the adults to support them with knowing what's right and wrong.
So I've certainly heard that a few times today, is a key adult matters in all of this. It's not a solo system in that sense. I'll quickly share. One of my children, 11 years old, was having lots of phone problems. We took it the last week. It's like a different person. Amazing. And we weren't very emboldened as parents to do that earlier. So
no, well, I can tell you my principal actually offers to keep the mobile phones in the school safe if the parents are having such a hard time at home. And that has actually worked wonders for some families because it's taken the blame game off the mum and dad and it's put it back on the school, and mum and dad have been able to negotiate better behaviours at home because the student isn't addicted to their social media.
So social media and online platforms can be a toxic place. Eleanor, did you want to add to that?
I just kind of wanted to acknowledge, I guess, the flip side of that as well, that when you often see that limit setting and boundaries around technology use is always important, and understanding how to create online safety with a lot of settings and things like that on like gaming, for example. But just I'm also wanting to acknowledge and to all the young people watching that how valuable modality, so like a way of communicating and staying connected to people that technology does serve, and social media, particularly during COVID. So whilst it does pose challenges, I think when it's we need to acknowledge that even gaming, for example, can be problematic, sure, but at times we work with a lot of people who are talking to their direct school friends playing Xbox on the weekend, and it's a really important form of social interaction. So I guess it's that idea of balancing it and it being an open conversation about, okay, what limits do we need to set on this, but where's the compromise? And acknowledging that it is actually a valuable form of connection when it is a safe space. Yeah.
I think that's such a great point, because you were talking earlier about belonging and people belonging to somewhere, and what if your only belonging you can find is online and be included?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think, and encouraging young people to find those services or groups, whether it be on like Instagram and things like that, where they can identify with people who are within their community, because sometimes we don't know someone directly, but you know, we can find a positive role model online, positive services that can be really, I guess, just let us know that we aren't alone. Yeah.
I think I'd like to also add to that. I think that's fantastic, because in a way too, particularly around hate and bullying, you know, it's all well and good to be able to say, well, just get off it and we can take your phone. But in a sense, it's kind of almost victim blaming. It's the person who's actually suffering then also has to disconnect to their community and whatever else. So I think another really, I think for young people, is to empower them to have that sort of strength to still be able to use that space, whatever, whether it's, you know, Snapchat, whatever it might be, using their space still, being able to disengage with something that's happening, but also I think maybe talking about bystander intervention. So if somebody, whether it's on Facebook or on Insta, whatever it is, no, it doesn't matter what it is, if there's a really hate speech, like if you don't have the strength, there's no shame in that, and you don't have to engage. But if you do, obviously looking after your well-being, call it out. Like if you're seeing somebody being racist, homophobic, sexist and ableist on any of these platforms, just be like, oh, hey, like, you know, like, try not to get into a fight. It's not about actually creating some monstrous fight that's going to carry on for weeks, but it's okay in a safe way, maybe even gently and kindly, just pointing it out, call it out. And so the person who might be a direct victim in this particular situation will know that there's people out there. That is also a really lovely way to sort of reach out and help somebody else who might be affected in those situations. So looking at bystander intervention, calling things out only if you're safe and comfortable to do so, and also being able to then go, okay, I've said my bit, and step away from it, and looking after your own well-being as well. So it's such a complicated space, but knowing where you're at is important.
I love that, and I thank you for your frame around victim blaming, because you're right, where's the other piece of work in this? It's like easy to go, well, just block everyone, but that doesn't stop other people from being nasty. It doesn't change anyone. And, you know, it takes back to that education thing. Sometimes people have an education program and they just go underground. Their values don't shift. So this diversity and inclusion is a very, very complex area. So just going to get Chloe to read us one more question. Question 7.
We know this year has been different with COVID, but when a school, and this question could also be founded on cultural diversity, why are there very limited cultural events? What can schools and communities do to build this post-COVID?
All right. Might throw to you, Casey. What would you like to see for local cultural youth events as the COVID restrictions ease?
Oh, I think a lot could be done in this space, and look, I probably could go on that for a while. I guess I think I'll talk more from the community aspect. I might leave the school for people with that kind of experience a little bit more. I think Ipswich has got the foundations of some really good, events, and that could be built as a much wider program of work. I think it would be a thing to see Ipswich become its own focal point of and hub of that. You know, when we think of, for example, I'm just kind of pulling something very quick out, is, in Pride Month we see the big march in Brisbane. That would be something so fantastic to see Ipswich become, known for those big things, because that really not only tells you then where Ipswich stands as a town, that builds into so many other aspects, beyond diversity, but that's where we really should be positioning ourselves as a city, is being at the forefront and a thought leader for those sort of events. So really, I think hitting those big ones that, really being thought leaders.
Beautiful. Thank you, Casey. And unfortunately, we are out of time. I just wanted to honour what Jay spoke earlier too around having interpreters at events actually makes a difference. So language accessibility for everyone, that is welcoming as well. And just a reminder that we'll have the helplines up